So let's talk about it, folks. There was a murder today in my city. In fact, it wasn't too far from where I was. I went into Manhattan today. I went into Manhattan and I found out that I was in Midtown taking care of business. And turns out around the same time that I went to Midtown to take care of business, it turns out I think it was shortly before I got into Midtown, that CEO Brian Thomas of United Healthcare Corporation was assassinated. And he was killed. And it was not a random killing either. Now, we don't know who the perpetrator is. And there's a lot of speculation out there. And I have a lot to say about this, as you can imagine. Well, let's just start out with the facts. Let's just start out with the local news. This is the local news report about how this CEO was gunned down on the streets of New York City. Let's do it. Let's just kind of go over the facts. And I'm going to give you important context, and then from there, I'm going to make some important political remarks. But let's just start with the facts.
City was just getting rolling this morning. 6th Avenue between 53rd and 54th Streets. Coffee runs underway. Some people walking to work. It was nothing but normal until the assassin's triangle took shape. The crowded sidewalk, a masked shooter decked in black, a moving target headed to a business meeting.
I want to be clear. At this time, every indication is that this was a premeditated, pre-planned, targeted attack.
Before sunup today here in New York City, an assassin in waiting outside this Midtown Manhattan hotel, pacing, according to an eyewitness, waiting for his target to stroll by on the sidewalk. This video of a cold-blooded gangland-style hit. The shooter on the left side of this picture, a 9mm pistol that appears to be equipped with a silencer, raised and ready to fire. The target on the right, 50-year-old Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare, America's largest health insurer.
The suspect approached from behind and fired several rounds, striking the victim at least once in the back and at least once in the right calf. Many people passed the suspect, but he appeared to wait for his intended target.
The shooter, all in black and a ski mask, had a jam pistol at one point and left several live rounds on the ground while clearing the gun and opened fire a second time. NYPD detectives say the shooter ran from the scene and got away on a rental bicycle pedaling into Central Park. GPS data from that bike now among the clues that police hope will point them to the suspect. And authorities working in the Midwest, Minnesota, where Thompson's company is headquartered, and Iowa, where he attended college.
We're reaching out to law enforcement in Minnesota, and we're also interviewing his co-workers and family members to see if there have been any specific threats against him in the past.
The assassin's triangle just a few blocks from tonight's big Christmas tree lighting in New York's Rockefeller Plaza. The NYPD is saying there's no general threat to that holiday tradition or a threat to anybody else, and they reiterate the attack this morning on Brian Thompson was targeted toward him. In fact, there were other people on the scene this morning who were not hurt or even threatened. But for now, there is still no motive, no murder weapon, and no suspect, Judy.
Yes. Watch breaking.
Now that is the local news report. Now, a few other things have come out since then. Apparently, his wife said that they had received a few phone calls at the house from somebody who was very angry about coverage denial. That has surfaced. Apparently, the shooter got on a rented bike and drove to Central Park and then disappeared after they got to Central Park. They've not been apprehended yet. And it's interesting because there are some people saying it was an expert job, but other people are looking at that and saying, no, it's not. Like, his gun got jammed. He used a rented bike. He left shell casings on the ground. That there are other people looking on and saying, no, this was very much not a professional job. But there are some people that say, look, this was a professional job. I mean, there's a couple things about this when we're just talking about the crime logistics that are important. Number one, New York City, Midtown Manhattan, as you saw, is the most widely surveilled section of the country. right? I mean, that, you're just a few blocks up from Times Square. The United Nations is in that area. Also, it's on 42nd Street on the other end. You got Times Square on one end, 42nd Street, United Nations on the other end of 42nd Street. This is a very, very heavily surveilled area. They got all kinds of video surveillance footage. On top of that, New York City has the most insane gun laws ever. You cannot have a gun in New York City, right? If you get a license to carry a firearm in New York City, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult even for security guards to get licenses. Armed security guards are a very hard thing to get in New York City. But even security guards can't get the license. I mean, it's really difficult. A personal gun permit, just forget it. You cannot have a gun in New York City. And for a long time, they had this policy of stop and frisk in New York City, where they pat you down. I mean, you can get serious jail time if you're just driving through the city and they find a gun in your car. You can go to jail for 2 years. You cannot bring a gun into Manhattan. But regardless, this individual that has been identified as male, he did bring a gun into Manhattan, a gun with a silencer on it. He did track down what appears to be an individual that, he did intend to kill, this very wealthy CEO of United Healthcare Corporation. He did intend to kill this individual. He did so successfully, and he is not yet apprehended. And this is kind of a big deal. I mean, first of all, we can just talk about a couple things here. First of all, do people get killed in Manhattan? Yes. But do they usually make a big deal out of it like they make a big deal out of this? No. And that's because this guy's a billionaire, right? Billionaires' lives matter more than working people's lives matter. Okay? Let's just be honest, right? If this guy had been just a ordinary working class person, it wouldn't have been all over CNN for today. It would have been on the local news. There was a shooting here, and then that was it. But billionaires' lives matter more than the lives of working people, and that's clearly wrong. On top of that, gun control does not work. I've been here in New York City. There was a shooting at a Home Depot in New York City while I lived here. There was a shooting at the Empire State Building while I lived here. There's shootings in New York City all the time. So if you think, having strict, crazy gun control laws is going to protect you from shootings, I think you're wrong, because there are mass shootings in New York City all the time. And there are crazy people who drive. There's, Islamic terrorists who drive their trucks into Times Square. There's, there's all kinds of crazy laws in New York City about guns, and they clearly don't stop violence. So that isn't the answer. But I also want to say one thing, which is that many people are speculating that based on the phone calls the woman received and based on the job that this man had as a healthcare CEO, that this was some kind of left adventurist action, right? That this was motivated by outrage about lack of access to healthcare. They talk about how United Healthcare denies people coverage. People have died because of lack of access to healthcare because United Healthcare is their insurer and finds some loophole and doesn't give them healthcare. It's possible, right? It's very, very possible that this was some kind of left adventurist attack, but we don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know that now. And honestly, if the police arrest somebody and that individual is a healthcare for all activist, a Medicare for all activist, we still don't know that that's the case. And I really would urge people, on the basis of we don't know what the motive was, don't celebrate this. Don't celebrate this, especially because we don't know why the person did it. And because we don't know why the person did it, it's really important that we not celebrate this and lay the foundations for the government to go grab some Medicare activist, some socialist, somebody whose Facebook is all about hating health insurance CEOs and blame it on them, because they do that kind of thing. right? The police are not CSI, with all due respect to law enforcement and all of that. CSI is a fictional television program. A lot of what police do is a crime happens, and their job is to get somebody as soon as possible to make the police department look good on TV. And their job is not to, to go into great detail and investigation at like Sherlock Holmes and find out who the real killer is. No, their job is to announce they solved the crime on TV. And a lot of times they will just grab somebody. So if you announce right now that this was a Bernie Sanders supporter, and this is because, and right, you're helping build the case to potentially frame an innocent person for this, right? So that's the first thing you need to remember. We do not know that whoever gets blamed for this is the person who actually did it. And we certainly don't know that it was somebody motivated by healthcare issues. We don't know that either. Now, one thing that has been pointed out is that this guy, Brian Thompson, was under investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice. Right? He was facing a criminal indictment for insider trading. That's a big deal. And Alex Jones and some others have speculated that this was maybe an internal hit from the corporate world, that this guy was going to go, sing a song, and he was going to go squeal on his buddies and the other CEOs, the other people who benefited from the insider trading. They're the ones who took him out, and that's possible, right? That's just as possible as it having been, somebody who's politically motivated. That is just as possible. So this could very well be, corporate CEO on corporate CEO violence, other insider trading people taking out somebody to keep them from talking. That could be what's happening, right? It could be a family dispute, right? It could be, an affair that went wrong. It could be organized crime, extortion, right? The insurance world, I'll just say this, is notorious for involvement in organized crime, right? There's all kinds of shady insurance activities where somebody drives over somebody's foot 2 days after they take out an insurance policy and get a $500,000 payout. And, there's all kinds of shady business in the insurance world, and it could be tied to organized crime. We don't really know what happened. We don't know why this guy was killed, right? And then that brings me to why I am very disturbed, very, very disturbed by the social media response to this killing. I'm very disturbed by it because I am somebody who believes that healthcare should be available to all Americans. And I know that we are not going to get it by people engaging in terrorist violence in order to achieve it. And I also know we're in a very, very, very dangerous political moment in this country, a very dangerous political moment, and that setting a tone that encourages violence is exactly the opposite of what we need right now. And I'm very, very disturbed by it. And I want to just say this about the healthcare debate. Bernie Sanders riled up the Democratic Party base in the 2016 election saying, I believe that healthcare is a right for all Americans. No one should be without medical care when they are sick. I am Bernie Sanders, and I think that you should have health care. Right? That was a very famous moment. And all kinds of people voted for Bernie Sanders. And it's been proven that they rigged the Democrat primary to make sure that Bernie Sanders did not win and that Hillary Clinton did win. And I was at the 2016 Democrat convention, and I saw how rank and file Democrats wanted Bernie and the corrupt political machine wanted Hillary Clinton. And I saw that. And then the next election rolled around, and the country was facing a pandemic. And somebody named Jimmy Dore said, hey, we're having a pandemic where healthcare is considered very important. And we've got these squad members, right? Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We've got these squad people in Congress that say that they are for Medicare for all. So why don't they force a vote on the issue? Why don't they demand a vote on Medicare for all? Maybe it won't pass, but in order to vote for Nancy Pelosi and for her to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, maybe the squad should force a vote on the issue of Medicare for all. That sounds reasonable, right? Well, what was the response to Jimmy Dore saying that? What was the response to Jimmy Dore daring to suggest that they should demand a vote for Medicare for all? They went after Jimmy Dore like you wouldn't believe, right? Young Turks and Anna Kasparian and the Jacobin crowd, and oh my goodness, they went for the jugular. Jimmy Dore was a white supremacist because AOC is a woman of color. How dare he criticize her? Advocating Medicare for all is class reductionism and ignoring racism and trans issues. Medicare for all means you only care about white men. And they just went nuts. I have never seen them go for the kill. Jimmy Dore was public enemy number one as far as these people are concerned. How dare he advocate a vote for Medicare for all? And it was weird. It exploded all over social media. If you demand a vote on Medicare for all, you are a bad person. You are disrespecting AOC. Jimmy Dore is a Trump-supporting neo-Nazi. How dare he say this? Blah, 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 blah. They just went all in. It was crazy. It was crazy. I have never seen such an explosive, toxic overreaction to somebody saying something pretty sensible, which is that all Americans should have health insurance. And what I've noticed is that many of the very, very same voices that are now celebrating the murder of this CEO, saying he deserved to die, saying the person who did it is a hero, are the very same people who canceled Jimmy Dore for saying that we should vote. We should have a vote in Congress about Medicare for all. Now, why is this happening? Why is it okay to shoot people down on the street, but it's not okay to have a vote in Congress? What's going on here? We're not allowed to work for Medicare for all within our democratic system. That is an unforgivable crime. And if you do it, you're a white supremacist and a Nazi. But if you take the life of another person extrajudicially and break the law and carry out a targeted assassination on the streets of our country, that's a good thing to do. You get applauded for that. What sense does this make? How do you see the inconsistency in that? I do too, but it makes sense. And that is why I am urging you, absolutely urging you, not to celebrate the murder of Brian Thompson. I am urging you not to say this was a good thing. I am urging you not to say Brian Thompson deserved to be killed, to say that the person who did it was heroic. I am urging you to draw a line in the sand and say no. I'm urging you to do that. Because right now, we are in a situation where our country is in a very dangerous spot. And let's just be honest. What is our job? What is our job? Our job is to actually create a new America for working families where people have access to health care and there's jobs for all. And our economy is tied in with the world in a win-win cooperation way. Living standards are rising. That's our job. Our job is not to extract revenge against people who disagree with us or people who are ruthless corporate CEOs. And look, I agree with everything people are saying about United Healthcare. It's a ruthless corporation. They profit from denying people health care. They lobby Congress in order to make sure that our medical system continues to be the corrupt scam that it is. I'm with you 100% on everything you're saying, right? I mean, but first of all, let's be honest. The first point that needs to be made is, did Brian Thompson himself do that? No. No, go read The Grapes of Wrath. You ever read The Grapes of Wrath? Very classic American Marxist novel, right? John Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath, and there's a story in The Grapes of Wrath about a farmer who's being evicted from his farm. And he's standing in front of his farm with his shotgun, and there's a guy with a tractor ready to plow his home over and clear his home away. And he's standing there with his shotgun, and the guy comes down from his tractor and he says, look, if you shoot me, they're just going to send another guy and he's going to plow it down. He says, okay, well, can I go shoot the man who sent you? And he says, well, I was sent by the local sheriff. He's the one who sent me. And yeah, I mean, you shoot the local sheriff, they're just going to hire another sheriff. And he says, okay, well, I'll shoot the bank that foreclosed on you. And he says, well, you can't really shoot a bank, right? Because a bank is an institution. So you could go all the way to New York and you could find the headquarters of the bank that foreclosed, and you could like shoot one of the executives, but then they would just hire another executive. And it's this whole conversation in The Grapes of Wrath where this angry farmer who's losing his home is saying, who do I shoot? And the point is, it's not a person, it's a system. It's a system. And if you shoot that guy who's going to evict you from your home, you're going to, you're just going to get evicted anyway. And if you shoot, the local sheriff who sent him with the eviction notice, they're just going to get another sheriff. And if you shoot one of the corporate CEOs, they'll just replace him with another. And then it's not about people. Right? It's not a moralism thing. It's not that Brian Thompson is a bad man and that's why people don't get health care. No, it's that we have an economic system where profits come before people. And we have a healthcare system that has been rigged to become a huge moneymaker for corporations. And as a result, we pay ridiculously crazy amounts for healthcare in this country, even though the quality of what we get is way lower for most people. We have a disastrous healthcare system in this country. And that, yes, we do need to move toward a system where we provide healthcare for the bulk of the population. And how will we get that? We will get that with a mass movement. That's how we'll get it. We'll get that by bringing millions of people into motion to demand action to change things. That's how we'll get it. Now, we aren't going to get it by somebody, randomly shooting a CEO. I mean, this is the reality of the situation. But it's more important than that, because if you go back and you read the writings of various revolutionary leaders from history, Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Che Guevara, etc., all of them opposed individual terrorism. They opposed it. Left adventurism, Blanquism, propaganda of the deed, this has always been opposed by serious revolutionaries, because these activities don't get us any closer to achieving our goals. They enable the government to more effectively crack down on radical forces. They make working people scared to associate with radicals because they see them as violent extremists. And actually, it's even worse than that. I would encourage you all to go read about the years of lead. The years of lead from the 1960s to the 1980s, Italy experienced a period of violence called the Years of Lead. And why were they called the Years of Lead? Because there were a huge amount of political assassinations and bombings. Go read about the Years of Lead. in the 1950s, after the Second World War was over, the Communist Party of Italy was very popular. Why? Because they had fought against Mussolini, because they had fought the Nazis, right? And the communists of Italy were very popular, especially northern Italy. There's a song that communists still sing, that the song of what they call the partisan brigades. These were the armed groups that fought against fascism in Italy, and it was called Bella Ciao. Soy comunista toda la vida. Oh, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Soy comunista toda la vida. Soy comunista di libertad and partisano. Da, 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 da. It's a very catchy song, but it was a song of the Italian partisan brigades. And after World War II, everyone saw what a mess Mussolini had made of Italy and how fascism was no good. And everybody saw the people who'd been fighting Mussolini up in the mountains with guns from the Soviet Union were the communists. And after World War II, the Italian Communist Party exploded in popularity. And the CIA was very, very worried about this because they thought that would lead Italy to leave NATO. And they thought that that would lead Italy to align with the Soviet Union. And they thought that would also disrupt ports and shipping because a lot of the ports in Italy, are run by labor unions that are associated with the Communist Party. And the USA was very, very worried that Italy would break with NATO and, become communist. And so the CIA launched a program called Operation Gladio. You can read all about Operation Gladio. And Operation Gladio was decades and decades and decades of operations to manipulate Italian politics to make sure that communists did not win the elections. It was to make sure that the Italian Communist Party did not win the elections. And what was the result of Operation Gladio? The years of lead. The CIA funneled money to groups of Italian fascists to murder communists. Fascism was not wildly popular in Italy after World War II. It hadn't worked out too well, but there were some Mussolini supporters around, and the CIA found a way to funnel money into their pockets and enable them to carry out assassinations. And then what? Well, there were communists who didn't like the Italian Communist Party. There were Trotskyites, and there were Maoists and anarchists and other elements who didn't like the Italian Communist Party. And the CIA enabled them to go out and blow things up. And you had the Red Brigades that were formed in Italy, and you had various groups, and sometimes these groups would assassinate corporate CEOs or assassinate bankers, or in some cases they would assassinate fascists, or they would assassinate the Italian Communist Party for being phonies. And leftists became associated in the Italian public mind with blowing things up and killing people. And fascists, these extremist groups that were, admiring Mussolini, they became associated with killing people. And politics in Italy stopped being a matter of, hey, which party do we think is the best, and started becoming a matter of people blowing each other up and shooting each other and killing people. And some people look at that and they say, well, that's great, Caleb. And then that led to a revolution. Everybody learned how to fight and kill, and then they overthrew the government and established a socialist republic. Wrong, 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 wrong. That is not what happened in Italian history. After a couple decades of the years of lead, the communist movement in Italy kind of ran out of steam. And the Italian Communist Party became Euro-communist and liquidated. And Italy has not had anywhere near the revolutionary working class enthusiasm that it had coming out of the Second World War because they made it into a clusterfuck. Right? I tell people, you should go read my book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. It's a book that I wrote, and I'm really proud of it because in chapter 3 of my book, I talk a lot, and it's about to be published in Chinese. I just saw the cover of the Chinese edition. Very cool. But in chapter 3 of the book, I talk about counter gangs, and I talk about, about all of that. And that if you read the writings of William S. Lind, who was the main Pentagon strategist for dealing with the counterinsurgency in Iraq, if you read the work of Frank Kitson, the British intelligence officer who oversaw defeating the IRA in Northern Ireland and oversaw defeating the Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army in Kenya, they talk about how the way you defeat an insurgency is very different than how you fight a conventional war. Right? A conventional war, it's very clear. You go into battle with the enemy has its army, you have your army, you face off, etc. But fourth generation warfare, insurgencies, these wars are fought very, very differently. And that they talk about how, he uses the example of William S. Lind in his book, Handbook of Fourth Generation Warfare. He uses the example of a child who is being beaten by their parent, by an adult, in a public space, right? Imagine that you're in a public space and some adult starts beating on their child, not just slapping them a little bit, but just beating on them, right? Eventually, if it goes on long enough, everyone there is going to intervene and stop the adult. Why? You don't know what the child did. Maybe the child deserves it. It doesn't matter. Because one is an adult and one is a very small child. And the optics are the child is the victim and the adult is the perpetrator. For the last 4,000 years, people have read a story in the Bible called David and Goliath. And I don't know anybody who in the last 4,000 years read the story of David and Goliath in the Bible and sympathized with Goliath and thought that Goliath was a good guy. No one thinks that, right? We tend to side with the underdog. And the reason that the Vietnamese were victorious and reunified Vietnam is because they were perceived as the underdog. The reason that the Algerian Liberation Front was victorious against the French, they were perceived as the underdog. And that it was especially discussed widely after the USA was defeated in Vietnam that the way insurgencies are successful has a lot more to do with optics than military force, right? The USA could kill a lot of Vietnamese people, but they would keep coming back because they had the propaganda high ground. They were viewed as a peasant country fighting for its national liberation. The USA was viewed as this mighty foreign empire that was violating their national sovereignty. And by the end of the Vietnam War, practically the entire world was cheering for the National Liberation Front of Vietnam and opposing the United States. And the same for Algeria. And it pretty clearly got to the point that the U.S. realized there was a problem. And if you read what Frank Kitson wrote in his book, Gangs and Counter-Gangs, and if you read what William S. Lind wrote in his Handbook to Fourth Generation Warfare, they talk about how counterinsurgency warfare is much more successful when you don't fight the enemy head on. William S. Lind, the Pentagon strategist, he talks about how the reason that the British were able to win in Northern Ireland is because they received more casualties than they inflicted. And it's true. More British soldiers were killed by the IRA than IRA men were killed by the British Army. But the British still won. How did that work? Because the British military realized that when they went up against the IRA, it was pretty blatant. It was David versus Goliath, the Irish people versus the British Empire. And so the British figured out a different plan. And what did the British do? They began funneling money and weapons to Protestant extremists. And those Protestant extremists would attack the IRA. And when the Protestant extremists who hated Catholics fought the IRA that was perceived as being Catholic, even though it had no religious test, but it was perceived as a Catholic organization, because of that, people would see that as an ethnic thing. They'd say, well, this isn't good. We don't want, two religious groups to kill each other. And the IRA was more and more focused on defending itself from Protestant gangs than it was on fighting the British Empire. And on top of that, many people in the population were weary of warfare. And as a result, the population continued to just say, we don't want killing and warfare. And the Vatican sponsored all kinds of peace marches through Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods. Can't we all just get along, sing kumbaya? And as the population got weary of the shootings and the killings and the terrorism and the deaths, and the Pope was singing kumbaya, and it appeared to not be a conflict between the British Empire and the Irish people. It became the Protestant gangs versus the Catholic gangs. It all kind of lost steam. And with the fall of the Soviet Union and all of that in the mid-90s, you had the Good Friday Agreement where the IRA surrendered. And the British Empire released all the IRA prisoners, and they all went home. And then they made a deal that if they ever get 51% of the population to vote for independence, it's settled, and the Provisional Irish Republican Army surrendered, and the 6 counties have remained part of Britain. And that's the case, right? And that was an effective counterinsurgency. And not only did they fund the Protestant gangs to fight the IRA, they also funded ultra-left elements, people that were claiming to be for what the IRA was for, but thought the IRA were sellouts or phonies. They also, encouraged drug dealers and criminal elements to merge into the IRA and try to get the IRA mixed up in drug smuggling and criminal activities, so the population would just see them as criminals. And by not directly confronting the IRA head on, but making the fight in Northern Ireland more of just kind of crazy violence and a clusterfuck that most people wanted to stay away from, they were able to defeat the IRA. And Frank Kitson was the guy who oversaw it. And he's the guy who defeated the Mau Mau Liberation Army in Kenya. And William S. Lind points to it in his handbook of, fourth generation warfare as the ideal way of fighting an insurgency. That if you make it a clusterfuck where you're with the state, you're with the ruling power, or you're with who knows what, you're with craziness, the state wins by default. Right? The reason the Vietnamese were able to win in Vietnam was because it was very clear. Are you with the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, or are you for the status quo that everybody doesn't like? Well, the Vietnamese people were not particularly happy. The peasants were poor. They didn't have land, etc. So, the main force against it was the Communist National Liberation Front. So they won by default. There you go. Now, at the same time, if you look at other national liberation struggles, they've been successful in the same way, and in the exact same way. Whereas, there's a solid force of opposition, and then there's the status quo. And everyone who is opposed to the status quo and wants things better draws. And as a result, that solid force of opposition gains ground. It becomes the voice and the expression of all the people's outrage at the status quo, and it is victorious. But they don't want a light switch effect like that. That's a light switch. Is it on or is it off? All right, and that's a light switch. That's a light switch effect. All right, and if you create a light switch effect, it is very easy to flip people. Right? If the population is being told you're either with us or against us, today they might be with you, but then they might start to change their mind about you, and then they're going to be against you. If you don't create gray area for people to be in, people are going to be with you or against you, and the chances of them being against you rises rapidly. But if you, instead of having a light switch, you have you're with us, and we're the main power, and we are very clear about what we want, we have the mainstream media, we have the prevailing narrative, you're with us or you're who knows what. If you're with us or you're in crazy town, then the status quo wins, because everything else is murky and unclear. And this is how they wage counterinsurgencies. And it's very effective. In Iraq, right, at first, when the USA invaded Iraq, the insurgency against the U.S. government and against the U.S. occupation was quite powerful. But they soon discovered that the majority of Iraqis are Shia Muslims, but there's a very large Sunni minority. And among the Shia Muslims and among the Sunnis, there are all kinds of different factions. And the US government began buying off different leaders locally and giving them money and manipulating the different insurgent groups against each other. And the way the USA was able to stabilize Iraq, the way they were able to do it was by creating such a confusion and state of division among the Iraqi population. And I mean, there was the United States and the government they were propping up. And then there was what? There was this Shiite group, there was that Shiite group, there was a Sunni group, there was Al-Qaeda, there was Wahhabis, there was Ba'ath revivalists, there was all kinds. And it was, are you for the prevailing power that has set up a government that has a bunch of troops supporting it, that runs the major media, or are you for crazy local warlords who all hate each other and are shooting at each other and don't get along with each other while they also don't like the United States? And the population gradually came to accept the United States and the U.S. occupation because the opposition was a clusterfuck. There was not a solid block of opposition to the USA. There was the USA and the government they propped up and a clusterfuck of crazy. And that's how they won. And that's how you wage a counterinsurgency. And you know, and this doesn't simply apply to armed insurgencies. It applies to intellectual insurgencies as well. You know, this is how you control the narrative, right? If the opposition to not having Medicare for all is a bunch of violent people that shoot people, is a bunch of tiny communist groups that all hate each other and are trying to assassinate each other, etc. If we're all at each other's throats and we all have different beliefs and agendas, and they boost some of us sometimes and make us suspicious of them, and then they boost some of us other times, and it gets to the point that everyone just kind of de facto supports the status quo, the prevailing position, which is, it makes sense. And that's how they do this. And you are more right than you know. You know well, John. I shouldn't say that. You are very right. You are 100% correct, John. This is how the U.S. government right now is handling dissent. They are treating us the same way they treat insurgents, which is that rather than just directly attacking us, they boost some of us, they suppress others, they manipulate us against each other, they create an atmosphere of suspicion, they create a huge amount of confusion and division, and they make it so, oh, okay, you're opposed to the USA sending weapons to Ukraine. That makes you what? Right? Everyone knows if you support sending weapons to Ukraine, you're the New York Times, you're the Wall Street Journal, you're the top voices in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Everyone knows what you are. If you're against sending weapons to Ukraine, you're what? Marjorie Taylor Greene, Scott Ritter, Caleb Maupin, certain names I won't mention, certain people that have done unforgivable, awful things to me, certain people that I can't stand, certain people I can get along with. You're a libertarian, you're a communist, you're an anarchist, you're a conspiracy, you're all these things. And so most people are just going to kind of pivot back into supporting the mainstream position because the other side is incoherent, divided, confused, giving out a whole bunch of different messages. And this is a strategy for dealing with dissident forces. You make sure there's not clear messaging, not a solid block. You make sure that it's completely divided and completely confusing. And that's how you win. And that's what the U.S. government is doing right now as they march toward the low-wage police state. They are manipulating the opposition. And they are finding ways to make sure that the opposition does not become solid, and to make sure that the opposition does not become effective, and to make sure that the opposition just becomes a confused mess of conspiracy theories and different ideologies and different factions battling each other and suspicious of each other and thinking each other are feds and all. This is how they work. This is how they control things. Right? That's how they do it. That's the method. And psyching people up for violence is a big part of this. Getting people to believe that violence is the answer. Look, I want to imagine this. Let's say we had a choice, right? Let's imagine that instead of Brian Thompson being shot down on the streets of New York City, let's imagine that hundreds and hundreds of working people from around this country who wanted healthcare occupied the offices of United Healthcare, They went in and they chained themselves together, and they said, we're not leaving until United Healthcare signs an agreement to stop lobbying against Medicare for all, right? And they just occupied United Healthcare's office by the hundreds. That would be illegal, right? That's exciting. And there would be police called. And I mean, that's not pacifism. I'm not saying you have to be a pacifist, right? I'm not saying you have to be non-confrontational. I'm not saying you have to beg for it. But let's say hundreds of people went and occupied the offices of United Healthcare and demanded that they got dragged out by the police. We would be way more likely to see interest in healthcare and the healthcare debate as a result of that than one guy getting shot on the street. And you know that. And it wouldn't just be a matter of that would get way more attention because they couldn't ignore it because there's hundreds of working people there. It would also be a matter of, in order for all those people to do it, they'd have to learn. Those people would have to learn to do it, right? They'd have to learn enough about the healthcare debate to be motivated to do that. They'd have to learn how to organize and how to get it done and how to assemble themselves and do what they did. And they'd have to make a bond with each other. There'd be a connection that they would make with other people. They would make friends in the struggle, and they would make mistakes in the struggle, but they would get better at it in the process. And maybe the first time they went in there, they got dragged out really quick, but the next time they'd go in and they'd do it even better, and they would learn the art of struggle, and they would get better at it. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people would be involved, and that could change the conversation. And one guy getting shot down on the street doesn't do any of that. Now, which do you think United Healthcare is more afraid of? Losing a CEO or a bunch of people, hundreds and hundreds of people getting so motivated and fired up about wanting Medicare for all and healthcare for all, that they go and they occupy and they won't leave and they engage in, civil disobedience and sit down strike? Imagine, right? Of course, they're far, far more afraid of a mass movement than they are of some jackass shooting somebody. And we don't even know if it was political. Right? And don't pretend otherwise. Now, I'm not saying people don't have a right to defend themselves. They do have a right to defend themselves. And in fact, every revolution that has ever happened in history has been an act of self-defense. It has been when people have peacefully organized. It has been when people have mobilized to get people elected, built their labor unions, etc., and in response to the government and the ruling class responding to their peaceful mass organizing in their millions, responding to it with violence, they then have to defend themselves. And they do defend themselves because they've seen they have no other choice and they can't rely on the government that exists to do it. And so they defend themselves. And that's very different. The labor unions that used to protect their picket line with guns, that's not the same as shooting some CEO, right? The Black Panthers that protected their communities with their armed patrols against police brutality, that is not the same as shooting down some random CEO on the street. One is an isolated act of individualist terrorism and adventurism. The other is people learning the art of self-defense in the process of building a mass movement and resorting to that when they feel they have no other choice. And those are big differences, right? And that people miss this. We advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. However, we recognize it is very unlikely to happen. It is very unlikely that as some kind of mass movement that mobilizes in its millions, organizes, and is ready to actually bring socialism, as that exists, it's very likely that the government of the United States would respond with heavy-handed violence and terrorism, and they would have to defend themselves. But we don't want that. We don't want a war. We would prefer a peaceful transition to socialism, even though we recognize that it is not likely, and we do recognize that it would be necessary to create a new state, right? It would be necessary for there to be a new government that would come into existence. We'd have to create a new kind of government. We couldn't build socialism with the FBI and the CIA as they currently are. We would need new institutions, that new state that would come into existence. But we do not advocate terrorism. We don't, right? And terrorism is something that genuine revolutionary forces have always opposed, and it's something that is boosted by the ruling class and by the ruling elite. And that is something that people may not see. But first of all, folks, the general response of the government to events like what happened today with Brian Thompson is not to publicize it. In fact, there's a lot more politically motivated violence than you would realize. But they have discovered that the main thing that people who engage in politically motivated violence want is publicity. My understanding is that from in the year of 1969, 1970, around that time, there were an average of 3 political bombings a day during those years because so many people were so upset about the Vietnam War and so many people were angry about the civil rights struggle and the oppression of black people that, and I mean, it's been published years later, there was an average of about 3 political bombings every day in the United States. But you didn't know about it, right? I mean, there was somebody I used to know years ago who lived near Columbia University, and there was the international school at Columbia University, which was considered to be a front for the CIA. And he said it was almost every few days there would be a kaboom out of the international school. Someone would blow it up in the middle of the night. Someone would plant a bomb there and blow it up because that was what they thought would make a difference. But it didn't get coverage in the news because they realized every time they publicize a political bombing, that encourages more people to do the same thing, and it makes the people who did it feel like they accomplished something, and so they didn't publicize it. So normally when there is political violence, they don't publicize it. And that's what makes me think we don't even know that this was even a political act of violence, but it has exploded all over the internet. Before it's even up, it has exploded all over the internet that this was an act of political violence, and we're all supposed to support it. And the very same people who canceled Jimmy Dore for saying Medicare for all and wanting to force the vote somehow are saying, oh, yeah, killing people on the streets is a good thing to do. Why? Well, I can tell you why. I will tell you why. It's not going to make me popular for saying this, but it's a fact. Look, we all know right now the main force that the establishment is using to enforce the status quo is the so-called left. And that sucks, okay? My life, my whole background was being a leftist, but I'm not a leftist. I mean, I'm an innovationist. I don't call myself a socialist or a communist. I want nothing to do with the left, especially. But we know the woke people are the main foot soldiers of imperialism right now. Who wants to send troops, send all kinds of weapons to Ukraine? The Democrats. And who is it who tried to kill Donald Trump? A leftist, woke Ukrainiac. Who is it who will cancel you if you dare support Russia? The woke people. Who is it that says that we absolutely need to send weapons to Ukraine and we absolutely need to, vote not negotiate with North Korea? It's the woke people. The woke people are the main foot soldiers of imperialism right now. And in the recent election, the non-woke candidate, Donald Trump, was the one who said, let's not send weapons to Ukraine. And let's negotiate with North Korea. And let's stop the political suppression that's going on. Let's not have the FBI meddle in our politics and suppress people for their political views. And Tucker Carlson supports the Uhuru 3, the political prisoners that I'm on my way to Florida to support in a couple weeks. And it is the woke people that are the main foot soldiers of imperialism. Donald Trump got elected on a platform of being less aggressive in foreign policy, not sending weapons to Ukraine, but settling the war, making peace with North Korea, etc. Now, obviously, it's complicated. He claims he's more pro-Israel than the Democrats are. It's hard to see how because their policy is exactly the same as his, but it's complicated. But we know that Donald Trump got elected and won the election overwhelmingly on a platform of saying, I am not woke and I am anti-war. That's how Donald Trump got elected. And we know that the woke crowd, they just haven't won over the American people. There's so much resentment among the American people to cancel culture, right? So many people have been canceled. Kids have been canceled at school by their classmates. People have been, smeared, and everyone has been, Everyone feels that every complaint that they have against somebody has to go up on the internet, and people are tired of the political correctness. People are certainly tired of the inflation and the degrowth economics, and they're all tired of it, and they associate it with the wars and with and there's just a general rejection of what calls itself the left in America right now. And good, I am one of those people. I am against the left. But that said, the left can't win with mass popular support. They can't. So how is it that the pro-NATO, pro-degrowth, pro-FBI faction of the American government can assert itself? Can't assert itself by popular support. Well, we know how they're asserting themselves. With violence. Right? I mean, they're planning to riot on the day Donald Trump takes the oath of office. I've been warning you all about how this communist socialist group, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, that claims to be anti-NATO, was boosted by The Guardian. And The Guardian, the main voice of British intelligence and the British deep state, decided to run an advertisement for Claudia Dela Cruz. And they basically advertised this socialist group and that they have this large office and they have all the permits and they're going to have a big rally, a big people's march when Donald Trump gets elected. And it's very clear that we saw what happened when Trump got sworn in the first time. We saw what happened on January 6th. It's very likely there's going to be provocateurs and other people. There's going to be a lot of violence in Washington, D.C. when Donald Trump takes the oath, right? They can't win public support, so they can intimidate people with violence and killing and chaos. But in order to do that, they have to psych up your average pink-haired, nose-ringed, woke person into thinking that killing people is a good thing, which they don't think. Most woke people are pretty nonviolent. The Antifa thing, right? They've been telling them, oh, if somebody is a fascist, it's okay to punch them. And actually, that's what they did last year at Trump's inauguration. They punched a Nazi. Someone punched Richard Spencer randomly on the street because of his political views, and it went viral. Punch a Nazi became a meme, right? The idea that it's okay to punch somebody because of their political views, to violently assault someone because their political views went viral. And that there has been big efforts to psych up the woke people into thinking that violence is okay, that it is okay to be violent against people with whom you politically disagree. And that is necessary for them because they're not going to win the popular vote. The popular vote went to Donald Trump. The American people want to vote for Trump. So the only way that they can try to assert their power is to terrorize people out of political debate. Right? To make people afraid to come out and protest because you might be assaulted, to make people afraid to say what they think because you might get canceled on social media. And so right now, the very same people that got mad at Jimmy Dore for daring to speak up for something they all supposedly believe in, Medicare for all, are now trying to normalize violence and get their supporters to think being violent, killing people, engaging in assassinations is a good thing to do. That is what they are doing. And I don't think that's a good thing. I don't want an America where I could get killed for what I believe. I don't want an America where I could get killed for what I say. And we've seen this come in different layers, right? We remember when the comedian Will Smith, right? Somebody made a joke about his wife at the Oscars, and he walked up on the stage and he hit the guy, right? That was a moment where a lot of people said, that's not good. That's not heroic. That wasn't a man defending his woman. That's a threat of violence. I mean, can you imagine if every comedian who ever offended somebody with a joke risked being assaulted by an audience member? That's not a good thing. That's a really dangerous escalation. And it was not a heroic thing for Will Smith to do. I mean, if the jokes were out of line, whatever, that can be addressed in other ways. But the idea that you can walk onto the stage and slap a comedian for their jokes, that's dangerous. And the idea that you can punch Richard Spencer for being Richard Spencer, is also dangerous. I used to advocate that kind of thing, and I was wrong, right? If Richard Spencer is putting on sheets and going out to hang black people, yeah, you can punch him and kill him and shoot him and defend yourself. But if Richard Spencer is just walking around being Richard Spencer, no, you don't have the right to hit him for what he believes, right? You don't. I'm sorry. You have a right to defend yourself. And if someone's being violent toward you, if someone's threatening you, if someone is trying to intimidate you, you have a right to defend yourself. But you don't have the right to punch somebody or shoot somebody or murder somebody because of their political views. You don't. Now, I know we don't know that it was because of his political views, or we don't know exactly what even happened in this case. But the notion of normalizing killing, over political views, that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing at all. It's not a good thing at all. People have the right to defend themselves if they're being threatened. People have the right to engage and struggle to defend their communities. But the idea that killing people because they think wrong, I'm against cancel culture, right? I don't think people should lose their jobs if they tweet something bad. I don't think people should lose their spot at the university because they make an inappropriate comment or something like that. And we have gotten way too retaliatory as a society, where people say something that someone conceives to be racist or sexist or homophobic, and the result is someone having their life destroyed. And that's not a good thing, right? And it's cowardly, right? Because it's a lot easier to fight some, coffee shop employee who made a bad tweet. It's a lot easier to fight some, university girl who got drunk and said something when she was, drunk. And, it's a lot easier to cancel and destroy the life of a normal working person who made a mistake than it is to actually change the world. And we've developed this sick internet culture where if somebody says something wrong or does something you disagree with, rather than fighting the system and fighting to bring changes that will improve the lives of working Americans, we target normal people who happen to be wrong or disagree with us, and we try to harm them. And we got to stop doing that. But the idea that we should then kill them, that violence against them is the answer, that is taking it to a whole nother level. And you might say, Caleb, well, that's outrageous. That's not going to happen. Read about what happened in Jamaica in the 1980s. Read about the political violence in Jamaica. During the 1980s in Jamaica, there were two political parties. One political party, the Jamaican Labor Party, was aligned with the American government. And the other political party, the People's National Party, was aligned with the Soviet Union. And there was a huge amount of killing by both of those political parties, by people aligned with those political parties, right? People aligned with the Jamaican Labor Party assassinated and killed people that were aligned with the Jamaican Popular National Party. And people aligned with the Jamaican Popular National Party, they killed people that were aligned with the Labor Party. And what was the result of this decade of killing in Jamaica? Did it lead to a socialist revolution? The people saw that they had their power and they took up arms? Absolutely not. It led to a lot of people fleeing from Jamaica. And it also led to a lot of people being scared to talk about politics at all. Because, if I speak up, if I'm a big supporter of the Jamaican Popular National Party, the gang from the Jamaican Labor Party might shoot me and kill me. And if I'm a big outspoken supporter of the Jamaican Popular National Party, then the gang associated with the Jamaican Labor Party might shoot me. And it led to a situation where most people in Jamaica were utterly terrified to talk about politics, because if they became too outspoken, they could be killed. Okay? That's not good. And did Jamaica end up becoming a socialist country? Well, for a while, they had a president named Michael Manley who was sympathetic to the Soviet Union. But eventually the Soviet Union fell, and now Jamaica is just a free market country with all kinds of poverty and all kinds of big problems, and they still have all kinds of gang warfare and killing, but have they become an anti-imperialist state? No. Right? Read about, this sounds like conspiracy stuff. It really does. But I urge you to read about Propaganda 2. Propaganda 2 was the Masonic Lodge. I know, but this is the Wikipedia page. This was the organization in Italy that was responsible for helping to spread armed violence and chaos in various countries. It was responsible for the years of lead. It was responsible for the chaos in Jamaica, and it was a Masonic organization. It was like a secret society that was involved in funneling money and weapons to far left, extremists, to far right extremists. And it was involved in just stirring the pot and making it all a crazy clusterfuck of violence and all of that so that U.S. imperialism could win by default, right? And this is how they run effective counterinsurgencies. They don't want it to be Vietnam, where you're either with the communists or you're with the status quo. They don't want it to be Algeria, where they're either with the resistance movement or you're with French imperialism and the status quo. They want it to be, yeah, you can disagree with us, but then it's a clusterfuck of crazy different causes and groups that are all killing each other. And that's what they want. And that's how they run a counterinsurgency. Plus, they also have learned that when politics gets very violent, the result, most people want to survive. And so they withdraw from politics. And that's what happens, right? Look, I mean, it's one thing right now. There's a lot of people that are very reluctant to get involved in politics at all, right? But conditions have gotten to the point that a lot of people feel like, I need to be a Trump supporter. I need to be a Bernie Sanders supporter. I need to get involved. But if the result of getting involved is getting killed, and if people are being actively hunted down and assassinated, there's not just some scuffles that happen at political rallies, but there's actual shootings and assassinations going on. People will generally stay out. They'll withdraw from politics because they don't want to get killed. And that's why I'm telling you that normalizing political violence is not a good thing right now. And I'm urging you to not celebrate this killing, right? Don't celebrate this killing. We need to get people to understand that the road to getting Medicare for all is building a mass movement, a mass popular movement of people who work together to carry out operations and accomplish goals in order to achieve it. That's what the goal is. The goal is not, look, I'm just going to say this part, right? And if you disagree with me or whatever, that's fine. But I actually want to speak to you on a spiritual level right now. And this is how I'll end these comments, right? What are we trying to accomplish? What emotions do we want people to feel? Do we want people to be seething with rage and vengeance? So mad about the injustices of our healthcare system that they go out and they make somebody pay and they gun down one of these executives on the street? Do we want people to set up a guillotine and cut off the heads of the rich people and seethe with rage and vengeance? Is that what we're trying to make people feel? Is that the spiritual feeling we want to send out in this world? Jealousy, resentment, rage, vengeance. Is that what we're trying to promote? No, it's not what I'm trying to promote. I'm trying to promote love. I'm trying to promote empathy. I don't want people to be indifferent to other people's suffering. I don't want people to feel isolated and alone, like no one cares about them, and issues like not having access to healthcare. Oh, you're on your own. That's your problem. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. No. I want people to feel powerful and feel that by getting involved in political movements, they can actually change the world. That's the first thing that I want. The next thing that I want is I want people to feel compassion and kindness and love for other people and empathize with the hardships that other people go through. I want people to feel optimistic about the future. That's what I'm trying to promote. And so if I'm going around going, yeah, they killed that CEO and his dead body on the street. Yeah. If I'm doing that, I'm not putting a spiritually clean, good message out into the universe. I'm not. And if you're feeling that way, right, you are not going to bring good things into the world, and your life is not going to go well. You're not going to attract good energy into your life, right? And good things are not going to happen. You are going to be spewing negativity into the world, and negativity is going to come back to you. And we're not going to build a healthy movement where people treat each other with respect, and we're not going to achieve our goals. If we are putting out a message of vengeance, violence, hate, Nothing good is coming from that. But if we're putting out a message of brotherhood and sisterhood and community and optimism and empathy and solidarity and empowerment of people and helping people to understand the real power they have if they can get involved in a mass movement, that's a good thing. And so that's why I'm urging you to not celebrate the killing of this CEO, and instead to help us envision the mass movement that is urgently needed to stop the march toward World War III and stop the emerging low-wage police state and build a new America for working families.